we're looking at osteoporosis. Now, I've decided to keep osteoporosis as one lesson on its own. The reason being that osteoporosis has not been asked on a long question since 2015. And that is 10 years ago by my calculations, which is a very long time ago. We know that it overlaps with calcium. Now, calcium was last asked on 2019, question 1B, but it was also asked the same year as osteoporosis, 2015. So there's a direct link between the mineral calcium and osteoporosis. Prior to that, we know calcium was asked in 2006 on question 2B, and they also asked the stages of the production of yogurt, which came up in 2024. So suffice to say, we need to keep a close eye on this particular topic. So we'll just write down here that it came up in 2015 on question 1 on section B. Now, I don't have to tell you that at this point, question 1B is the long question on section B. It's worth 80 marks, a mass of 20% of our overall Leaving Cert grade, and most importantly, it's compulsory. So students had no choice in 2015 but to answer on osteoporosis. It was worth 18 marks. 4.5% of the Leaving Cert grade that year. Now we're just going to look at osteoporosis first, and then we're going to have a quick look at the framework of that question 1B in 2015. I'm not going to write it out in full because the full sample answer will be posted on your platform in the section with all the other notes and attachments. So, osteoporosis we have mentioned in the minerals handout. Now, first and foremost, we generally associate osteoporosis with elderly people. Now, I don't think we should be asking a 17 or 18-year-old what an elderly person is, because I'm probably put into that category. But technically speaking, one is an old age pension over the age of 65, but people, in their 60s don't consider themselves old. So we're talking people in their 70s would be considered elderly people. And that's normally what we associate osteoporosis. Now, a really nice definition of osteoporosis is that it is excessive loss of bone density. So when we covered calcium, we mentioned a term called peak bone mass. Peak bone mass, we said, is the point in every person's life where their bones are at their strongest point possible. And I said to you, it's particularly important for women that before they get pregnant, that their peak bone mass is as strong as it can possibly be. Now, once peak bone mass is achieved, which is usually around our age 30, bones naturally, so it is a natural part of aging, that as we get older, our bone structure naturally changes. And bone mass is gradually lowered as we get older as part of the aging process. And with low bone mass, our bones become softer because the minerals in our bones will leach out slowly over the years. However, some people, this natural aging or loss of bone mass is much, much faster than it should be. So where we can't actually stop our bones losing bone mass, we can certainly control the rate or the pace at which this loss of bone mass occurs. And that's what I mean by osteoporosis. It's excessive loss of bone density. So we expect some loss of bone density as we get older, but when it's excessive, it can lead to this condition. Now, you could potentially have people in their 60s with osteoporosis. Women are particularly prone to excessive loss of bone density for a number of reasons. One, women are 8 times more likely to get osteoporosis because of the fact that as the female gender, our bones are naturally less dense than males. Secondly, we can't forget pregnancy, particularly if during the pregnancy, the pregnant woman has not increased her calcium and vitamin D intake throughout the pregnancy. And as a result, during the calcification process, the fetus will drain the mother's calcium and phosphorus supplies from her bones, so that at the end of that pregnancy, the woman's bones are that little bit softer, or the bone density is that bit lower. And if there are subsequent pregnancies where this occurs, well, then you're going to have excessive loss of bone density. Then, of course, we have the menopause. And the menopause, again, just to remind ourselves, is when the ovaries stop releasing eggs into the fallopian tubes, the menstrual cycle stops, and there's this, due to this massive drop in hormones, progesterone, but particularly the drop in estrogen can speed up the loss of bone density. So women really do need to be careful. They are much more prone to this osteoporosis, also called brittle bone disease. And the reason why we call it brittle bone disease is that the bones become soft and porous, and they become very fragile and can be easily broken. Because of the fact that women are so prone to osteoporosis, women can get what's called a DEXA scan, as well as men, of course, DXA. Now, a DEXA scan is a scan specific to looking at a person's bone density. Ideally, women, particularly postmenopausal, should have this done at least every couple of years. And then they can know in advance if their bones maybe are softer than they should be for their age group. And precautions can be taken to slow down the excessive bone density loss. Other things we should know about osteoporosis is we need to make sure that we exercise regularly. So the recommendations are that we should be exercising at least 150 minutes per week. And if we want to keep our bones strong, ideally it should be weight-bearing exercise. So walking, running, also things like golf would be good. So that's going to help. Tobacco, smoking, to be avoided at all possible, but certainly if you do drink alcohol, to make sure that you have it in moderation, because the toxins from smoking and excessive alcohol can also damage bone health. So osteoporosis is a brittle bone disease usually associated with elderly people. However, you can have middle-aged women, women in their late 50s, early 60s with osteoporosis for the reasons I've outlined earlier. Now, I really like this particular description: excessive loss of bone density. So we note that the loss of bone density, we said earlier, is a natural part of the aging process. But how fast or how quickly that bone loss density occurs will depend on a number of factors: our diet, the amount of exercise, and our lifestyle, i.e. drinking alcohol, smoking, etc. Bone is constantly changing, and like I said there a few minutes ago, as we age, our bone structure alters, and we note that bones become softer, they become weaker due to the leaching of the minerals, particularly calcium and phosphorus, out of the bones. So from birth to about 40, now you could say there 30 to 40, because it does depend on individuals. There is no specific age that we can say, oh, that is the year where peak bone mass is achieved. From after peak bone mass, and we're going to say bone from birth to 40, bone strength increases. But we note that women, particularly, the rate of bone loss in women is 8 times higher because of the fact we have or lower bone density than men. We have pregnancy, we have menopause, and we said the drop of estrogen can speed up this loss of bone density. Now, symptoms of osteoporosis, which we definitely need to know at least 4. So the most obvious one is, we should say first of all, or I should say first of all, osteoporosis is a very silent disease that you could be walking around and not even be aware that your bones are becoming very soft, very brittle. And a real telltale sign that you possibly have osteoporosis if you fall from a standing position. Now, we all know that people can have what we call awkward falls, or you trip awkwardly, i.e. You twist your ankle and as you fall there might be a fracture. We see kiddies there on bouncy castles or whatever, and they have an awkward fall. But if you literally just fall forward from a standing position and your bones break, that's definitely a warning, red flag that there's something wrong with the bones. You shouldn't break a bone falling forward from a standing position. Loss of height, at least by more than 2 centimeters, again because of natural bone loss density or loss of bone density. Men and women will shrink slightly as they get older, but if we shrink more than 2 centimeters, that could be an indication. Now, think back to all the old Irish stories that you've been looking at since primary school, and I'm sure you've been told about Shanachie and we've looked at old Irish poetry. But if you've ever seen pictures of older women in those old stories, they always had a shawl, but do you ever notice they had a stick and a hump at the top of their back? Because remember, contraception was not around 100 odd years ago, and even 80 years ago, 70 years ago. So women had in Ireland 13, 14, 15 children. Now, due to poverty, many of those babies didn't survive, sadly, but certainly the pregnancy would have gone its full 40 weeks. And as a result of all those multiple pregnancies, hunger, they're not going to be thinking about their RDI of vitamin D and calcium and so on. You had this pronounced in very young women. I'm talking now, when I say young, remember lifespan was not as long 100 odd years ago. So we're talking women in their 40s, late 40s, early 40s, with this hump at the top of their back, very pronounced in some cases. And this is called a dowager's hump. Now that's severe indication that there's osteoporosis present. Some women in 2024, you see a slight pronounced hump, and that is because they're not aware that this silent disease has been carrying on. Receding gums, not a very pleasant image there, or sudden severe upper, mid, low or back pain. Right, measures to prevent osteoporosis. Diet, obviously, is a key one here. So the diet needs to be high in calcium, high in vitamin D over the years, and we take in the correct amount. And a reminder again, Irish people are generally have low levels of vitamin D. You need to make sure before you take vitamin D supplements that you have a blood test, due to the fact that vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, and therefore you need to make sure that if your levels of vitamin D are okay, you don't take the supplement. Because remember, we mentioned that condition, hypervitaminosis. Now, it would be very unusual to have hypervitaminosis in this country, but vitamin D supplements are really important, because remember, we don't have very good or excellent sources of vitamin D naturally in food. Mushrooms, egg yolk, oily fish, and so on. But if you're not eating those foods, you certainly, and you haven't had plenty of sunshine during the summer months, you need to consider vitamin D supplements. Exercise regularly. We said 150 minutes a week, and ideally weight bearing. So if just put bearing there. So weight bearing exercise. Avoid cigarette smoking, excessive intake of alcohol or caffeine, we said, because the toxins, particularly cigarette smoke will have a negative effect on bone, and also high levels of alcohol can increase the risk of fractures and reduce bone formation. Just to be aware, a DEXA scan is used to measure bone mineral density, and it does highlight early stages of osteoporosis. Now, just to note that osteopenia is the stage before osteoporosis. So osteopenia, and this can be detected by the DEXA scan. Now, some people get a yearly injection if they have osteoporosis to try and help manage it. Now, dietary modifications can be written as specific dietary requirements. I've said to you on a number of occasions how they often, use words or terms differently. So it's exactly the same thing. So in terms of our diet specifically, plenty of foods rich in calcium. And I don't want you constantly thinking, oh, calcium is only in dairy products. Yes, it is in quite a lot or large amounts, but a lot of people now are choosing to cut back on dairy products. So you've got green leafy vegetables, beans, tofu, which is made from the soybean. Other examples then would be fruit, like oranges, all high in calcium. Next, foods containing vitamin D, but like that, you may possibly have to take vitamin D3 supplements if you're not getting adequate amount in your diet. Avoid too much phytic acid and oxalic acid. Again, note, I've said to you about when you're asked specific dietary requirements, always go for the balance, what to include, what to avoid. So positive, include vitamin D, avoid, include, and include. Now, phytic acid, remember, in excess can block calcium absorption, where calcium phytates are formed. The same with excess oxalic acid. The soluble calcium, mineral salt, binds with the excess oxalic acid to form calcium oxalate, which is an insoluble form of calcium. Foods rich in protein and vitamin C can help absorption of calcium, but to a lesser extent than vitamin D. And also magnesium, found in nuts, soybeans, fish, green vegetables, whole grain cereals and bread would be important. Now, certainly learn all of these points, because again, a reminder that osteoporosis has not been asked since 2015. So I'm just going to look at the framework. Can I emphasize this is the framework of the answer? The full question in its entirety will be on the platform. So 2015, and again, it was question 1B. It was on osteoporosis. I'm going to put a big NB here because it overlaps with calcium, and it's 10 years. It's a long time, and it was worth 18 marks. Now, in summary, what they asked was the following. So, what is osteoporosis? And what factors increase the risk of osteoporosis? And the two of them together were worth 18 marks. So you actually didn't know how many factors. Now, if that had been 16 marks, what factors increase the risk of osteoporosis, 16 marks, I'd have said 4 by 4 and I would have known. I've said this a few times. Students hate these questions. I don't like them myself either, because you're just wondering, well, how many factors do I give? I've said to you before, the magic number in a situation like this, if it's part of a number of questions in one section, I would have gone with 4. So I'd have given 4 factors, and I would have described briefly or given a definition of osteoporosis, and then I would have given the symptoms. Now, the way the marking scheme worked out, what is osteoporosis was worth 6 marks, 2 by 3. And there were 12 marks going for what factors increase the risk of osteoporosis. They wanted 3 risk factors at 4 marks each. In reality, students, we said many times, or I've said many times, should always err on the side of caution. So I would have given 4, but just to be aware here. So what is osteoporosis? Like I say, we're looking at the framework. So my first point, I would have given a definition. So you'd have said about excessive loss of bone density. You might have mentioned that it's also called brittle bone disease. And when you talk about osteoporosis, you're talking about, we won't use brittle again there, we'll take soft, weak, porous, another one, fragile bones. So that would be my first part. Secondly, then, I would have given symptoms. Now, if I were correcting that in a class situation, like a class test, I'd have given 3 for the definition, and I'd have given 3 for the symptoms. Symptoms, we said, would be the dowager's hump. You know, this pronounced hump at the top of the back, loss of height greater than 2 centimeters. We could have said receding gums, or another one then, we said where a bone or bones break or fracture from a fall from a standing position. So, what is osteoporosis? Always say what it is, and then give some symptoms. So that was worth 6 marks back in 2015. Moving on then, they asked, second part, what are the risk factors of getting osteoporosis? Now, I hope you're screaming in your head what factors. They wanted 3, but I've given you 4. So certainly age. We can't stop the aging process. So as we get older, it's a natural part of aging that bone structure alters, the bones get softer, the minerals leach out, calcium, phosphorus, etc. Gender, we said women particularly are 8 times more likely to get osteoporosis than men. So we've got things like the gender of women. We said pregnancy would be one, menopause would be the other. Then we have exercise, or a risk factor would be lack of exercise. And we said ideally 150 minutes a week weight-bearing exercise. And I have put in the sample answer as well, people who are inactive are definitely higher risk of getting osteoporosis. So if someone unfortunately was wheelchair bound, they would have a higher risk. So age, gender, lack of exercise would be the key risk factors. Right, so they would be our 3. Now the 4th one, of course, would be diet. And if we had a diet that was low in vitamin D and low in calcium, that would definitely increase our risk. So if it were me and I had to give 3, I definitely would talk about diet, I'd talk about age, gender and lack of exercise. And then my 4th one then would be age. Please be careful. Make sure you know osteoporosis very, very well. 10 years is a very long time. So that is the end of today's lesson.